The ice storm was like a monster, roaring across the frozen land. Winds howled louder than thunder, and sharp snowflakes cut through the air like tiny blades. The planet, known only as Delta Nine, had no cities left, just ruins and cold silence. Somewhere in the storm, a small alien child cried alone, her body shaking, her skin turning pale blue. She wore only a thin silver wrap, not enough to fight the freezing winds. Her tears ran down her cheeks, but froze before falling, turning into tiny crystals. She had no name anymore, no family, no home, only fear, cold, and silence surrounded her. She tried to move, but her legs were too weak. Her small hands dug into the snow. Trying to crawl forward, the storm was too strong, her voice too weak. She fell again, her face buried in the cold white powder. Just then, a faint sound came from the distance, a steady crunch of boots in snow. Jack Nolan, a human explorer from Earth, pushed forward through the storm. He was wrapped in thick gear, a heated helmet, and snow-resistant armor. He had no idea anyone else was out here. He was only trying to reach the old mining station nearby for shelter. But something made him stop. He thought he heard a sound, soft, broken, like someone crying. At first, he ignored it, thinking it was just wind. But then he heard it again, a small cry carried by the storm. He turned and followed the sound. Moving carefully through the deep snow, his visor picked up a faint heat signal. Low and fading, he walked faster, heart racing, hoping it wasn't a false reading. Then he saw her, a tiny figure lying in the snow, shaking, skin like smooth ice. She was not human. Her head was slightly larger, her ears pointed, and her skin glowed faintly blue, but she looked like a child, no more than 5 or 6 years old. Jack's breath caught in his throat, without thinking. He dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. She was ice cold, barely breathing. He wrapped his emergency cloak around her and pressed a heat pack to her chest. "Hey, stay with me," he said softly, even though he knew she wouldn't understand. She opened her eyes a little, just for a moment. They were large, silver, full of pain and fear. Then she closed them again. Jack stood up, cradling her in his arms. He didn't care who she was or where she came from. She was a child, and she needed help. He turned and ran through the storm, his boots sinking in the snow with every step. The wind fought him, but he kept going, after what felt like forever. He saw the outline of the old mining shelter. It was half buried in ice, but still standing. He slammed the emergency door open and stepped inside. The air was still cold, but better than outside. He placed the girl gently on the floor and checked her pulse, weak but there. He activated a portable heater and laid her close to it. Then he removed his helmet and looked at her again. She was strange, alien, but so peaceful now. Her body stopped shaking slowly. She opened her eyes again, this time looking at him longer. Jack smiled and offered her a warm water bottle. She didn't move, but her eyes followed his hands. "Don't worry, kid," he whispered. "You're safe now." He looked around. The shelter, old, broken tech, no working signals, limited power. It would take days before anyone could come, but for now, they were alive, and that was enough. The child slowly reached for the bottle and sipped a little. She looked at Jack, her silver eyes blinking. He pointed to himself and said, "Jack." Then he pointed to her, asking with a gesture. She didn't answer, just stared. "Okay," Jack sighed. "Luma it is." He smiled again. "You look like a Luma." Luma didn't understand the words, but she felt safe. The storm still screamed outside, but inside there was warmth. A human and an alien child sat together in silence. Two strangers brought together by the cold, and far above them, something watched through the falling snow. The storm was not the only danger here, but for now, in the frozen quiet, one life had been saved, and one human had made a choice. not knowing that this simple act would change the future of two worlds forever. The storm raged on outside. Thick snow pressing against the metal walls of the old mining shelter. Inside, the air was cold but calm, filled with soft hums from the heater Jack had repaired. The lights flickered, weak and yellow, but enough to see. Jack sat near the alien, Gurloom watching her sleep beside the heater. She was breathing better now, her cheeks slowly turning from icy blue to a soft lavender. Wrapped in layers of his extra gear, she looked smaller than ever, like a fragile star fallen from the sky. Jack rubbed his hands together, trying to warm up his own fingers. He hadn't planned to stay here long. His original mission was to collect samples from an old dig site. Not babysit a freezing alien child, but something in him wouldn't let go of her. She needed him, and that was enough. He stood up and looked around the shelter. The place was once a mining outpost for humans. Left behind after the resource war ended, rust covered the corners, and frost had crept along every pipe. A broken console in the corner blinked once every few seconds, trying to stay alive. Jack checked the signal transmitter. Tapping the screen, no connection, he muttered. Not yet. The storm was still blocking every signal. If help was coming, it wouldn't be today. Suddenly, a soft sound made him turn. Luma was awake. She sat up slowly, her silver eyes wide with fear. Jack raised his hands and smiled. Easy, he said softly. You're safe here. She looked around, confused, then touched the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her fingers curled around the warm cloth and she held it tightly. Jack took out a protein bar and unwrapped it. He broke a piece and offered it to her. She sniffed it, then took a bite, her eyes watching him the whole time. A moment later, she nodded slightly and Jack smiled. See? Not poison, he joked gently. Luma didn't understand his words, but she gave a tiny smile. He pointed to himself again. Jack, then to her. You. She didn't answer, only lowered her gaze. Jack nodded. Still Luma then. He stood and walked to a side panel in the wall, pulling out old tools. The power source was weak, barely enough to last 2 days. He needed to fix the main battery or find another way to stay warm. While he worked, Luma wandered the shelter slowly. She moved like a shadow, silent and careful, always watching him. At one point, she picked up a small metallic sphere from the ground. She held it close to her chest and didn't let go. Jack noticed and walked over. What's that? He asked, kneeling beside her. She opened her tiny fingers, revealing the sphere. It lit up gently in her hand with a blue glow. Symbols moved across its surface. Alien writing Jack didn't understand. He pulled out his scanner and held it over the sphere. The device beeped but couldn't read it. Strange tech, Jack whispered. Where did you get this? Luma pointed upward toward the ceiling, toward the sky above them. Jack frowned. You came from the skies. You nodded slowly, and with a look of sadness, Jack sat back, confused. A ship, maybe, or a crash. Was she the only one left? He didn't know, but now he had more questions than answers. That night, as the heater buzzed softly, Jack set up a makeshift bed for Luma. She lay down quietly, holding the glowing sphere like a teddy bear. Jack sat nearby, sharpening a piece of broken metal into a blade just in case. He didn't trust the silence. Something about the storm felt unnatural, and the way the snow had covered everything so quickly. It wasn't just weather. Suddenly, the lights flickered again. The scanner near the door beeped once, then shut off. Jack stood quickly, checking the entrance. Nothing moved outside, just darkness and snow, but he felt a presence. Watching, waiting, he locked the door tight and turned to Luma. She was awake again, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She raised her hand and pointed to her neck. There was a symbol there, a strange mark, softly pulsing under her skin. Jack moved closer and scanned. The scanner beeped and blinked red. Unknown genetic tag-restricted data. His heart skipped a beat. "Who are you?" he whispered. Luma didn't answer, just looked at him with tired eyes. Outside, the storm roared louder, and something, somewhere in the snow, moved toward them, but inside the shelter. For now, they were still safe. A human and an alien child. Alone in the cold, connected by fate, and watched by something unseen. Morning came slowly on the frozen planet, but there was no sun to see. Just pale white light behind thick clouds and endless snow. Jack stood near the broken window, his eyes scanning the storm. The winds were calmer now, but the cold was still. Biting, he held a warm cup of synth coffee, made from his last few packets. Behind him, Luma slept quietly, curled up in a blanket like a small animal. She had stayed close to him through the night. Holding the glowing sphere in her hands, Jack hadn't slept much. That strange mark on her neck kept flashing in his mind. It was glowing under her skin, like a soft tattoo made of light. He had never seen anything like it. And the scanner's warning, restricted data, still echoed in his ears. He moved closer to her and sat down on the cold floor. Luma slowly opened her eyes, blinking at him. He gave her a smile and said, "Morning, Luma." She didn't reply, but her eyes were calm, no longer full of fear. He pointed to her neck gently and said, "This. What is it?" Luma touched the mark with her small fingers. Her face changed. It was not fear, but sadness now. Then she slowly lifted the sphere again and placed it on the floor, to Jack's surprise. The glowing sphere opened like a flower. A small hologram flickered above its fuzzy, but clear enough to see. It showed a group of tall beings that looked like Luma. They stood in a circle, surrounding a young child, Luma herself. They placed their hands on her shoulders, and the glowing mark appeared. The hologram ended, and the sphere closed itself again. Jack sat in silence, trying to understand. "She's special," he whispered to himself. "Not just a survivor, not just a random alien child." The mark wasn't just a birth symbol, it was something deeper, a sign, maybe a rank, or worse, a target. He pulled out his AI device and connected it to his scanner again. This time, he used his emergency override coda, risky move, but he needed answers. The AI beeped, then spoke. "Mark identified genetic code. Class Zeta, royal origin. Detected. Access level. Classified." Jack's eyes widened. Royal origin. He repeated, shocked. That meant she was someone important, someone powerful, and someone people might be hunting. He looked at Luma again. She sat quietly, playing with a small piece of metal like a toy. She didn't look like a royal figure. But maybe on her world, she was more than a child. Maybe she was the last of her kind. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the roof of the shelter. Jack jumped up, pulling out his plasma knife. Luma froze, her hands gripping the sphere tightly. Another thud, louder this time, shook the walls. Jack ran to the door and checked the scanner, still broken. No signal, but he didn't need tech to know something was up there. He motioned for Luma to stay quiet. She nodded, her eyes wide again with fear. Jack climbed a small metal ladder to the roof hatch. Moving slowly, he opened the hatch just a little, peeking outside. The wind slapped his face, but he could still see a shape moved in the snow, tall, thin and mechanical. It had no face, only sensors and scanners glowing red. It was not human, not alien, a machine, silent and deadly. Jack ducked back inside and closed the hatch quietly. One machine meant more would follow. They were scanning for something or someone. He turned to Luma. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" She didn't answer with words, but her eyes said yes. She held the sphere close to her chest and curled up again. Jack sat beside her, mind racing. Why would machines hunt a child? Unless they wanted her because of the mark, because of her blood, her name, her power. He remembered old files from Earth Command. Rumors of a peaceful alien race with technology hidden inside their biology, a race that could control energy. With their minds, they were called the Luray, and they vanished during the last galaxy war. Could Luma be one of them? The last Luray child. Jack stood and walked to the terminal again, trying to boost the signal. He needed to send a warning to Earth, or at least ask for help. But the storm still blocked everything. They were alone, and the machines were getting closer. He turned back. To Luma, her silver eyes met his, and she reached out her hand. Jack took it, surprised by how warm her skin had become. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'll protect you," he said. No matter what, outside, the snow fell heavier. And above the shelter, 3 more machines moved through the storm. They had found the signal, and they were coming inside. A human and an alien child prepared for what was next, not knowing that this moment would be remembered across stars as the beginning of something far bigger than a storm. The wind outside had slowed, but the cold stayed sharp like glass. Jack checked the shelter's door again, making sure every lock was sealed. He could feel the danger now, not just from the storm, but from what moved inside it. The machine he saw on the roof was not alone. Something was hunting them through. The snow, patient and silent, he needed to act before it was too late. Luma sat quietly in the corner, her back against the heater. She still clutched the glowing sphere close to her chest. Her silver eyes followed Jack with a mix of trust and worry. She was still just a child, but Jack knew she understood the danger too. Jack opened a small metal case from his gear pack. Inside were old mining tools, wires, a few explosives, and a cracked energy blade. Not much, but maybe enough to defend. The shelter, he began setting small traps near the entrance. Plasma wires stretched low, pressure pads near the door, and a flashbang grenade above the hatch. It was basic, but it might slow down whatever was coming. As he worked, Luma stood and walked over to him. She held out her hand and pointed to a piece of metal he hadn't used. Jack gave it to her, confused with slow, careful movements. She shaped the metal into a strange curve, then pressed the sphere into it, to Jack's shock. The sphere locked into place and glowed brighter. A soft blue field surrounded the trap. It looked like a shield. Jack stared at her. "You know tech?" he said in awe. Luma gave a small nod, her face calm but serious. She wasn't just a child with a royal mark. She knew how to fight. The shelter lights flickered again. Jack checked the power reading, and his stomach dropped. The energy was being drained. But not from inside. Something was tapping into the power line from outside. He ran to the scanner and hit reboot for a moment. The screen showed a live reading, then it froze. But not before showing 6 heat signatures moving toward the shelter. All cold, all mechanical. "They're here," Jack said. Grabbing his weapon, he motioned to Luma to hide under the metal workbench. She obeyed quickly, covering herself with a thick sheet. The first thud hit the roof like a hammer. Jack stepped back, waiting, breath sharp and ready. Then came the sound of something crawling, metal claws scraping across steel. One drone dropped past the window, its red eye glowing through the frost. Jack didn't move, waiting for it to enter. The front door creaked. The handle turned slowly. And then boom! The flashbang trap exploded, filling the shelter with white light and noise. The drone screamed, its sensors overloaded. Jack dashed forward and slashed it with his plasma knife. Sparks flying, the machine dropped to the floor. Twitching and sparking, more followed, crashing through the roof and vents. Jack fought hard, dodging and cutting, setting off traps. 2 drones were blown apart by his plasma wires, but one slipped past and found Luma hiding under the table. It reached for her with a needle-like arm, but before it could touch her, Luma raised the sphere. A shockwave of blue light burst from her hands, blasting the drone backward. It hit the wall and shattered into pieces. Jack stared in disbelief. You did that. Luma stood up, the sphere still glowing in her palm. She looked stronger, now her skin brighter, her stance steady. The mark on her neck pulsed with the same light as the sphere. Outside, 3 more drones circled the shelter. But they didn't attack. They stopped moving as if waiting. A new signal was being sent from above. A large shape moved in the snow. Slow and deliberate, not a drone, but something bigger. Jack looked out through the cracked window and froze. It was a command unit, armored and tall, its body half machine, half organic. Its face was hidden behind a mask, but its eyes glowed like fire. It raised a long finger and pointed straight at the shelter. Jack grabbed Luma and pulled her close. "We have to run," he whispered. "We can't stay here." But Luma shook her head and pointed to the floor. The sphere in her hand lit up again. The floor panels began to glow. A hidden elevator was under them. Jack's eyes widened. A hidden exit. He helped Luma press her hand into a control panel. The floor opened slowly with a soft hiss, revealing a tunnel below, just as the roof cracked open and the command unit dropped inside. Jack and Luma jumped into the tunnel just in time. The hatch closed above them, blocking the machine's roar. Below, the tunnel was dark, but warmer. Lights lit up as they moved forward. Ancient tech, untouched for years, came to life at her touch. Jack looked at Luma with awe. "You're not just special," he whispered. "You're the key to something big." And behind them, the cold hunters screamed in frustration. Their target had escaped for now. But the hunt was far from over, and the real secret of the mark had just begun to shine. The tunnel below the shelter was old, but strong. Metal walls stretched deep underground, covered in frost and dust. Tiny lights along the ceiling blinked to life as Luma walked ahead. Jack followed behind her, breathing hard, his knife still in his hand. The cold above had been deadly. But down here, it felt different, quiet, ancient, and filled with secrets. They walked in silence for several minutes. Jack watched the walls. Reading old human writing, this place was built by miners, maybe decades ago. But what confused him was the alien tech wired into the floor and ceiling. Symbols glowed with soft blue light every time Luma stepped near them. It was like the tunnel recognized her. At the end of the hallway, they found a sealed door. Luma placed the glowing sphere into a slot on the wall. The door opened with a low hum, revealing a small control room. Inside were dusty screens, power, cores, and a communication console. It was a hidden command post, likely abandoned during the last war. Jack moved quickly to the console and wiped the dust away. He powered it up, using his emergency pack, hoping the antenna still worked. The screen flickered, then a weak signal icon appeared. "Come on," Jack whispered. Fingers flying across the controls, he set the system to send a coded message to Earth Command. "Distress call from Delta 9. He typed, "Found alien. Child Royal Mark machine hunters in pursuit. Need extraction." The system blinked, sending the signal into space. Then everything went dark again. "No confirmation," Jack muttered. "Just have to hope it got through." Luma stood nearby, her small hands resting on the console. She looked at him, then pointed to the screen. Jack nodded. "I told them you're here." She didn't speak, but her eyes softened. Suddenly, the room shook slightly. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the lights blinked twice. Something had entered the upper shelter. Jack knew the machines would search every inch and eventually find this tunnel. He walked over to a storage unit and opened it. Inside were old human supplies tools, sealed food packs, a water tank, and a plasma rifle. He grabbed the rifle and checked its charge. Only 1 bar left. Still better than nothing. Luma moved to the center of the room, standing in front of a tall wall with alien carvings. She pressed her hand against it, and a new hologram appeared. This time, it showed a map of the Galaxy 1 with stars marked. In red and blue, a blinking dot showed their current location. Lines connected it to other dots, forming a pattern Jack didn't understand. "What is this?" he asked. Stepping closer, Luma touched another part of the wall, and a new image appeared. A giant tree, glowing with blue energy, its branches made of stars. Jack realized it wasn't just a map, was a code. A message passed down by her people. "This is your history," he whispered. Luma nodded slowly, her eyes shining. The shaking returned, louder now. Jack grabbed her hand. "We need to move," but Luma didn't move. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a small metal disc. She placed it into a slot on the wall, and the entire room lit up. Suddenly, Jack's communicator buzzed. It had received a message. He opened it quickly, eyes wide with shock. It was from Earth Command. Message received: extraction team en route. Protect the child at all costs. Subject confirmed. Lyrae Royal Line. Last of her kind. Jack stared at the words, his throat dry. "She's the last," he whispered. "The last of the Lyrae." The machines above must have picked up the signal too, because the shaking grew stronger and faint metallic screeches echoed through the tunnel. Jack turned to Luma. "We can't stay here." But before they could move, a hatch on the far wall opened automatically, triggered by the disc. Behind it was a transport pod, small but fast. Built for emergencies, Jack helped Luma climb in, then strapped himself next to her. The pod's AI activated, scanning both of them to lifeforms. Detected launch sequence beginning. The door behind them slammed shut just as the tunnel filled with red lights. The pod shot forward like a bullet, racing through a narrow underground rail system. Jack felt the pressure push against his chest, but he kept his eyes on Luma. She looked calm, her hands still holding the glowing sphere. Minutes passed. Then the pod slowed and stopped in a hidden underground hangar. The exit opened, revealing a wide room with ancient machines and one landing platform. Above them, sunlight broke through cracks in the ceiling. It was a secret escape route, one last hope for survival. Jack helped Luma out of the pod and looked up at the hole. In the ceiling, a ship would come there if Earth Command made it in time, but they weren't alone yet behind them. The cold sound of metal steps echoed through the tunnel. The machines had found the route, and they were not going to stop. Jack raised his plasma rifle. Standing in front of Luma, "I sent the message," he said quietly. "Now we hold the line," and above them, in the brightening sky, the sound of engines began to roar. Help was coming, but they would have to survive just a little longer. And that meant facing the cold hunters one last time. The air in the underground hangar was heavy and cold. Frost clung to the walls, and silence filled the space like a warning. Jack stood near the broken platform, his plasma rifle aimed toward the tunnel entrance. Luma stood behind him, her small hands wrapped around the glowing sphere. Every second felt longer, every breath sharper. They knew the machines were coming, and they knew this could be the final fight above them. Sunlight leaked through the cracks in the hangar ceiling. It was the first real light they had seen in days, and with it came the faint sound of engines. Earth's extraction ship. Still far, but coming fast. They just had to hold the machines off a little longer. Then the sound came sharp, metallic, cold, claws on steel, echoing through the tunnel like death approaching. Jack narrowed his eyes, fingers tightening around his weapon. 3 drones entered first, red lights glowing from their heads. They didn't wait. They charged forward like predators sensing blood. Jack fired, the plasma bolt slicing through the air with a loud hiss. One drone exploded in a burst of sparks. The second ducked and kept coming. Jack rolled to the side, dodging its strike, and slashed it with his energy blade. It screamed and fell, sparks spraying like fireworks. The third drone leaped onto the platform, but Luma raised the sphere. A wave of blue light pulsed out, freezing the drone in place like stone. Jack didn't. Hesitate, he struck it with the blade and shattered it. More came, dropping through ceiling vents and crawling along the walls. Spiders made of metal, cold and fast. Jack threw a shock grenade. Lighting up the room, 2 more fell, but one landed behind him, claws slashing. It cut into his arm, and he grunted in pain. Falling back, Luma screamed. Running toward him, she held the sphere high, and this time the light exploded outward. The machines shook, sensors glitching, unable to move. Jack stood again, holding his bleeding arm. "Thanks," he said, breathing hard. Luma nodded, her face full of courage. They were not just fighting, they were surviving together. Then the ground trembled again. Something bigger was coming from the far end of the tunnel. A shape appeared, tall, armored, and glowing with red energy. It was the command unit. Leader of the hunt, it walked slowly, its face hidden by a smooth black mask. In its hand was a weapon unlike anything Jack had seen. A fusion lance, glowing bright with stolen energy. Jack stepped forward, but Luma grabbed his hand. She shook her head and pointed upward. Jack understood she wanted to get to the surface. To safety, but the command unit raised its lance and fired. The blast hit the ground near them, sending both flying. Jack landed hard, coughing. The rifle was gone, burned. The machine stepped forward, aiming again. Luma stood between it and Jack, her body glowing with blue fire. The mark on her neck lit up, and the sphere hovered above her hand, spinning faster and faster. The command unit stopped. Scanning her, Lee identified. It said in a deep, robotic voice, "Subject must be extracted alive." It stepped forward, claws reaching, but Luma released the sphere, and it shot into the air. A beam of energy burst from it. Striking the ceiling above, the ceiling cracked. Ice and stone falling everywhere. Light poured in. Along with the sound of ship engines, a human dropship hovered above the hangar. Its hatch open, weapons ready, soldiers rappelled down, firing at the machine. Jack reached for Luma and pulled her close. "Now?" he shouted. The command unit roared and lunged. But a missile from the dropship struck it mid-air. The explosion shook the entire hangar, sending fire and smoke across the walls. The machine's mask cracked, revealing wires and black circuits. It tried to stand, but Luma stepped forward again with one final wave of her hand. The sphere returned to her. She pointed it at the machine, and a soft tone played, one only she could hear. The machine stopped moving, frozen in place, shut. Down by her voice, Jack stared in amazement. "You ended it." Luma turned and gave him a tired smile. The soldiers reached them and pulled them onto the dropship. Jack held Luma close as they lifted off. Below, the hangar collapsed behind them, burying the command unit and the last of the drones in the sky. The sun finally broke through the clouds. Jack looked down at the ice world, disappearing beneath them. Then looked at Luma, safe in his arms. "She's the last of her kind," he said to the commander, "and the bravest one I've ever met." The ship soared into the sky, and the cold hunters were gone. The dropship soared through the sky, leaving the frozen world of Deltanine behind. Below them, snowstorms still raged, and the remains of machines lay buried under the ice. But above, the sky was calm, wide, and full of light. Jack sat in the medical bay of the ship, his arm bandaged, his clothes torn and scorched. Beside him sat Luma, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her eyes staring out the window. She didn't speak, but her presence was strong. The soldiers treated her with quiet respect. They knew now who she was, no longer just a child, but the last of the Lee, a living symbol of a race once thought extinct. The captain of the ship walked over to Jack and saluted. "Your message saved her," he said. "Earth Command has confirmed everything." Jack nodded, tired. "I didn't do it for orders," the captain smiled. We know. A few hours later, they landed on the orbital base above Earth. Medical staff rushed to help Jack. But he waved them off. See to her first, he said, pointing to Luma. But Luma didn't need medical tools. She was already healing. Her skin glowed softly, her energy returning with every minute. Scientists and ambassadors waited behind glass walls, whispering and watching, but none dared approach her directly. Only Jack stayed at her side, later that night. As the stars sparkled outside the station window, Luma walked to a console and placed the glowing sphere on it. It lit up again, projecting images of her people, their cities, their forests, their skies. Everyone on the station watched in silence. Even those who had only heard stories of the Lyrae felt tears in their eyes. This is her memory, Jack said quietly. She's sharing it with us the next day. A ceremony was held in the Unity Hall of the Earth's Federation. Jack stood on the main stage, dressed in a clean uniform, but still wearing his old dog tags. Beside him stood Luma, dressed in white, her silver eyes calm and glowing. The hall was packed with leaders, diplomats, historians, and even children. But all eyes were on her. The Grand Chancellor stepped forward and spoke. We gather today to honor two things: hope and courage. He looked at Luma, then at Jack. This child is the last of the Lyrae, but not the end of them. She carries their light, their knowledge, and their kindness. Then he turned to Jack, and this human, he said, found her alone, freezing in the storm, and chose to save her without knowing her name, her story, or her power. He showed the strength of humankind in war. But in compassion, the crowd stood and clapped, loud and proud. Luma looked at Jack and smiled. Then she stepped forward and raised the sphere in her hand. A light spread across the hall, soft and peaceful. Images of stars, planets, and ancient songs filled the air. People gasped as they saw visions of a better future, one where humans and Lyrae worked together. Jack whispered, "You're showing them what could be." Luma nodded. Not just memories, now, but possibilities. Months passed, and the story of Jack and Luma spread across the galaxy. News channels called him the stranger who changed the stars. Children wore necklaces shaped like the sphere. Schools taught the history of the Lyrae alongside Earth's own and Luma. She didn't return to her old world. It was gone. Instead, she stayed among humans. Helping build a new future, she learned their language, their science, their dreams, and slowly, she taught them hers. Jack became her guardian, her protector. But more than that, her friend. They traveled together, visiting colonies, helping refugees, solving problems everywhere they went. People greeted them with hope. One day, years later, Jack stood in front of a large statue in Unity Park. It showed a man kneeling in the snow, wrapping a blanket around a small alien girl. The plaque beneath read, "Humanity never leaves anyone behind." Jack smiled as he looked up at it. Luma stood beside him, now taller, stronger, her eyes full of light. "You still remember that day?" he asked. Luma nodded and answered in perfect English. "I remember the cold," she said, "and your warmth." They stood in silence, watching people walk by, human, alien, children of both. The storm that once tried to take her had passed. The machines had been destroyed, the fear gone. But the bond between one human and one alien child remained. It had started in the snow, in silence, but it ended in light, in legend, and across stars and stories. One truth lived on. A single act of kindness can save a life, and sometimes it can save the universe.